Okay, so we are in Ayin Gimel Amid Aleph, and we're uh, let's see, we are starting with the word Pardesa, which is it's about a third down. Um,
Looks like more about halfway down to
well,
me.
we're halfway down. Yeah, closer to halfway down. All right, so yeah, Pardesa. Okay, so again, we're discussing, and again, most of what we're going to be learning are different sort of vignettes on the question of whether, mostly the question whether, um, how and if Ribis applies for making a payment for future produce. Obviously, when you make a payment and you don't know what the value of the future produce will be, then you're subject to the question of whether or not you're getting back more than what you actually paid for. So many different there's sort of many different ways of looking at this, and we were talking last week as well about the case of um, if someone gave money, for instance, to we were talking about donkey drivers who were the catalyst for moving produce. Again, different approaches to the question. So we're going to take a look at a couple of these different ones this morning, and it'll give us some insight on the halacha. Um, so pardesa. Pardesa means a field or an orchard. Um, Typically, if someone pays for the what will become the harvest, let's say, of a vineyard. Part is typically a vineyard. So the question becomes, um, at this point in time, the grapes aren't even ready to be pressed. So one doesn't even know the caliber of the grape or how productive the harvest will be. So just generally speaking, how do you look at it? So there's a machlokes of Asi, Rav Otar, Rav Osar, Rav Osar. Sorry, Rav. I'm sorry, Rav Osar, not Rav Osar. Rav Osar, Shmuel Shari. So machlokes between Rav and Shmuel as to whether or not you can make such a transaction, because this is a typical case of not knowing what the yield will be. So the Gemara is going to explain to us what's the depth of the machlokes, how do we understand it? Rav Osir, given the Lekame Shapet Fei,
Excuse me, Rabbi.
say again?
Excuse me. They dismiss the notion of the history of how well it was all the last 10 years. There's no chazaka.
There's
Or
no chazaka. You're right. You're right.
Why would they dismiss it if in fact, a certain vineyard's always producing good stuff? The buyer and the seller would say, look, I expect it to be a repeat of the last 5 years, so stop worrying about it and I'll take the money now and you'll get the yield and the price will be the same as last year, but it seems to be totally absent from these positions.
I think the assumption is we're making the assumption that if you went back and looked 10 years, you'd find that there wasn't a typical year. Some years, depending on weather, depending on soil content, who knows? In other words, you can't just say automatically, we know it's going to yield 100, whatever, lugim or whatever it is of grapes. So every year is a challenge. So Rob generally says that the reason why it's osir is because he takes the view that whatever you pay, you're likely to get more than what you paid. Again, maybe that is a chazaka. Maybe that is based on history. You can pretty much say that if you're gonna that the yield will be greater than what you anticipate. And if you can't do it by chazaka, you could say the possibility exists that you're not going to be exact, right? That you're going to be under. Therefore, it's also because you just don't know, and why do you engage in the question of potential ribbons? So he's part of being a machmir and saying that the likelihood is that you will get more. Where he gets that from, I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it is on past practice, or maybe just estimating what it might be. But in any event, he is a machmir, and he says you can't rely on the fact that you're going to not get more than what you paid for, which will be roots. Okay. And therefore, mischaze ki agar, it looks like the typical case of where you get more because you wait for it, and that's ribbis. So it's the idea of the longer you wait, the better the return is ribbis. So therefore, Rav says, no, I won't accept it. Shmuel Shari, let's look at Shmuel. Why does Shmuel say yes? Given how it may to you, since there is a question, again, of whether or not there'll be bad weather or a hurricane or who knows what. And so there will be less than what you expect because the vineyard won't produce what you're anticipating. So then, therefore, it's not a question of, yeah, I'm going to get more if I wait because I may not get more. So I think that the question here, Jay, may in some ways be tola on what happened before. We don't know. But the fact is that so maybe Ravas is going on history, Rav is going on history, and Shmuel is going on history. But in either event, one has an optimistic view of the future and one has a pessimistic view. So according to the optimistic view, you're going to have rivers. So therefore, generally speaking, you can't engage in such a purchase because of the problem of rivers. Now, is this universal or not? Omar of Simi Bachia. So right away he qualifies Moide Rav, and Rav is Moide the Sore, and where, and again, I'm not sure how people typically harvested grapes, whether it was, he's saying with ox, in other words, an ox-drawn cart, maybe that was the typical, or maybe there are other ways. But he's saying that if it is harvested b'toirei with oxen, then he admits that you don't necessarily have rivers. The nafesh psadayu, because the loss from the oxen trampling or walking on it or eating or who knows what. Therefore, it's not, Rav was saying is, oh, it's an automatic that there will be more than what you bargained for. And again, maybe on history, he saw that. But he says all bets are off when you have harvesting through this mechanism that typically shows that there is damage done to the grapes, right? And therefore, you can't be sure that you're going to get a yield that will be greater than what you paid for. So again, we're talking theoretical here, and maybe it's based on some history, is that Rob feels that typically the yield would be, again, depending on what he's paying, of course. So we're saying that when a person contracts for grapes, they contract less than what the yield would be. So again, that there's no way of knowing because this isn't it's not an exact science. Whatever happens in the growth period, that's what happens. So in any event, that's the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel, and we see that Rav, according to Rav Simi, there's a qualifier, which means that he doesn't automatically say it. It depends on the circumstance. Maybe oxen will be a bigger problem than if he hand picks it, or maybe I don't know, some other. I'm not exactly sure how they harvest grapes, but in any event, now today, let's say for instance, they use probably big machines. They have that go around picking off the grapes. It's not a hand job, that you pick it by hand. So the question is that better or worse? Is the machine reliable, or will it squash the grapes, or what will happen? But so in general, that's the machlokes, and we pascha usually like Shmuel because he was later in time, and we say that usually that's how we look at it. So anyway, that's the machlokes. It's a perspective on the question of ribbons. Now, again, I said these are vignettes. There's different stories or different events that give rise to the question of ribbons and how we handle it. So here's another one. Amalei Shmuel. Lahanu Dushavte Shiva. Okay, so maybe they still do it, but it was very prevalent in the time of the Gemara that they would lease out portions of the field to sharecroppers. It doesn't exist anymore because of the way the things are done on a large scale. But when you had a smaller farm or a smaller area, then an owner would make some money by leasing it out to a sharecropper who would then sort of pay for a portion of the proceeds. That's how they made some income. So in this case, and it was typical apparently in the time that the sharecroppers did not have their own seeds to seed the ground, so they had to in most cases borrow. They didn't have the money, so they borrowed the seeds of the crop. They would then farm it and do what they have to do, and then they would repay, and they would also repay the value of the seeds that they used. So basically, they came in without anything, and they left with some kind of a profit after using both the land and the seeds of the owner. Okay, now, so what's the story with someone who borrows the seeds? So here you have a different issue. He's going to repay the seeds. So what does that look like? It looks like seb is seb, because I'm going to borrow, let's say, I don't know how seeds are sold. Let's say maybe by the bushel, the mushel. So he was going to borrow a bushel worth of seeds to seed the ground, and he was going to return that same amount. Well, that's typically seb b'seb. And seb b'seb we say you can't do because you're returning the exact item, but the values have changed. So that's where the potential for ribbis comes in. So forget about what the sharecropper is going to pay for the actual proceed. The returning of the seeds could be a problem of ribbis kaseh b'seb. Says the Gemara, hafucha ba'ara. So what he should do is he should till turn over to till the ground. So in other words, he's not borrowing the land. He's actually making a kinyan, because one of the ways of making a kinyan of the ground is, I mean, you can't lift it, you can't make mashicha, so you have to do some work. So if you turn over the ground, meaning that you show that you're doing a davar, a maisa that shows kinyan, shows ownership. So now you've bought the land. So when you buy the land, then what you're doing is you're working your own property. So it's no longer, I'm borrowing and therefore I'm returning, and it looks like seb to seb. No, you've now sort of established a kinyan. You now own the land, and everything you do is on your cheshbon, it's on your dime. So now when you repay, you're paying something that you own, not something that you borrowed. So that's kind of the way, again, it's a different approach. How do you get out from the question of ribis? And again, these are vignettes on specific things, but if we enlarge it to maybe mices that are, in commerce, then these are suggestions of how you get around the question of ribis by doing certain things that change sort of the material aspect of what you're doing. You're not borrowing and therefore returning. You're actually, acquiring. Okay, yes, he lent it to you, but you acquire it, and now you're repaying. He says ve'ilo, and if not, then also. Then it's a typical loan, and it's forbidden. So again, how do you get around the question of seh? You get around it because you're not borrowing to return. You're actually borrowing. You're going to own it. Whatever happens on your watch. So it's no longer just a question of a straight return, which could be ribis because now the value of the seed will be greater. So again, that's a different way of approaching and avoiding ribis. Okay, a different situations. Again, these are all situations that have something different than the other. Amalei Rava Lahana the mantre bagay. So Rava said, with regard to when they during the harvest season, they would hire guards to guard that no one should come and steal the produce. So what's the question? So here the question is, it's a whole different question. So the when does a guard get paid? Again, up here halacha, we have different. It's different than what we do in our economy. You'll find many situations where, but what the halacha says to do is different than the way we practice our economy. Okay. So when does a person typically get paid? He gets paid after he does the work. So when someone does the work, then he gets paid, no problem. Now, what happens if the person finishes his work and then has to wait to get paid until after not just the harvest, but the threshing, the work it takes to complete the
grinding and everything
cycle. So now he's not getting paid just for guarding, which would be perfectly fine. By waiting until after the entire process is complete, he's going to get a salary which then could be more than he would get just for watching, and therefore it has the appearance of ribis. It has the appearance of ribis. Again, it's not exactly ribis, but we're talking about the question of being paid for waiting for some period of time, and that typically is a ribis issue. So the ribis issue here is that the watchman is going to get paid at a later date beyond when he just finishes his work, and that will appear to be ribis. So again, it's a little bit of a strange issue. From our standpoint, it's not typical ribis. So how do you get around that there shouldn't even be a question? That's what the Gemara is trying to.
Why would waiting be called a ribis? There's no winner here.
The ribis is that the person has use of the money and use of in other words,
the owner still has the money. He hasn't paid the worker.
Right, but he can, instead of having to pay on the first of the month, he pays on the 15th of the month, and he gets use of the money for 15 days. That, according to what the Gemara is telling us, is a potential problem, because if he should be paid on the first and he doesn't get paid on the first, then those 15 days are
No,
days in which the owner is using money that's not his, in which
but
case, again, in the
yeah,
most subtle level, he's getting an advantage. What is ribis? We're saying ribis is getting an advantage in a transaction. So if I owe you money and I don't pay you because I can use the money to make business, then
but what did the worker expect when they made a deal? He's going to be the worker.
he expects to get paid once the harvest is completed.
So
And here he's
so
waiting until after it's threshed and squeezed and
so
completed.
the owner's not following the agreement.
And that's where there's the potential for, you're right, that's where there's the potential for rivets. But if I say to you, yeah, you should get paid now, but if you wait 15 days until I finish my threshing and everything else, here's what you'll get, here's what I'll pay you. So
Pay him more.
pay you more. And that more is what is the chash ribis. That extra
Oh,
payment, because
but
he's not doing any work.
yeah, but it's part of the original deal, it
No,
sounds like.
no,
So,
no, no, it's not. It's not part of the original deal. The original deal was that he was going to get his money on
oh,
a
okay.
certain date, and by waiting for a period of time, then he makes more money. So you're right. If
Okay.
it was part of the original deal, then you're right.
So
There's no problem.
so
But here
the
the problem
owner
is that it wasn't part of the original
so
deal.
the
So the Lord
owner is
speaking,
so
what?
the owner is abusing the worker.
That's correct. So how do we get around that? Says the Gemara, again, same kind of situation as in the sharecropper. This is poku hafucho bebe dore. So that the guard, the one who's guarding the field, should go to the place where it's harvested, to the threshing floor, and he should, whatever they do at the threshing floor, they mix it, they do something there. Therefore, that changes the context, Jay, that now that you've done some work on the threshing floor, you're not just a guard to get paid at the end of the harvest. You're now a worker who's going to get paid at the end of the threshing floor. All this is showing is that it's very nuanced. You have to, in order to change your status, you got to do something to change your status. So you're not just a plain guard, which was the original deal. Now
Yeah.
you go and you do some work. So now, Memela, if you get paid later, you're getting paid for the work. So if you're supposed to get $10 for the guarding and you wind up getting $12 because you did some work on the threshing floor, then you can legally say, okay, he's getting $12 because that's what he's doing.
But
He's
there's
not
no rivets.
no rivets, no rivets, right? The whole concept of rivets goes away. The
Okay.
schiras and the mishalem is el, because that's why I said schar is only paid at the end of the whole project. Vahishata, and at the time at the end of the project, uzla de call musla gabe. They're giving him more money. They're giving him a greater amount of money again because he earned it. It's not a question that they're doing him a taiva. Um, uh, he kind of earned it. So again, the subtlety of this particular case is that to avoid ribis, sometimes you have to change the scope midstream so that there isn't the what the original deal might have been ribis. Now it's changed
Yeah.
its character. Okay, so now, so again, all kinds of different variations of the theme of how we look at ribs. So now, Amalei Rabbanon l'Rava. The Rabbanon said to Rava, okay, Ka'ochel mar ribis. That so Rava hired a sharecropper. Okay, Rava was a businessman, and he hired a sharecropper. And the Rabbanon said to Rava, "You are guilty of ribis." What is that? Ooh, what do you mean? Rava is guilty of ribis? What happened here?
Can't be.
But
Can't be.
right, the kula alma shakla arba, because you have a field and you hired sharecroppers to do your work, typically like anybody else. So what's the problem? He says because the general in the area where he lived, the general consensus was that they took arba, meaning arba, 4 measures of grain from the sharecropper for the lease, if you will, to the sharecropper to do the work. So that was the typical. It took 4 measures of grain. Misalka Larisa Benissen. And so cyclically in the cycle, they would finish with the sharecropper in Nisan because in other words, the work would be done and they would get paid and fine, they would move. Mar, he says, but Riu Rava notalu ad iyar, you kept the sharecropper another month, right? And the shuttle shita, and you take 6 measures. So you're not doing what everybody else is doing, and what you're doing seems to be ribis, because you're again, we'll see exactly what the set off is between this and an ear. But it says you're keeping him till ear, and then you're charging him more. So on the face of it, he said that seems to be ribis. So the question is this a question of ribis because of the delay in time? So there's more time, and therefore there was a bigger benefit. In other words, the delay in time for waiting is what we say is ribis. Is this that kind of case where because he held him till ear, he was allowed to take another 2 measures of grain? So the kasha on the kasha is, here's the standard, and you're doing something not in the standard. Is what you're doing ribis because you're not doing what's in the standard? Is there something wrong here? So Rava is going to defend himself and is going to show that what he did isn't ribis, and here's why. Amalahu, so Rava said, Atun ko avidson shalokadim. So he said, no, I'm not doing anything wrong. You're doing something wrong by the way you're proposing to do business. Why? When you lease the land to the sharecropper, then the sharecropper is now the balabos of that piece of land. Of course, he has to pay a fee, but he controls that land. You no longer control that land. So Rava gave the land to the sharecropper. So now, if you say, all right, your lease, so to speak, is over in Nisan, then you're shortchanging the sharecropper because there's still more time to harvest. So you're the one who's taking advantage of the sharecropper because you established a price and you said, okay, but it's over. You already finished your harvest in Nisan, and there's more left over. So you're really taking away from him. Ano notarnu ad ear. I wait until ear, and he gains that much more. Yeah, sure, I charge more, but I charge more because he gains much more. In other words, the proportion of what he gets for the extra month is greater than what I'm taking in my 6 measure. So Rava wants to turn the tables and say that you have to be careful because, again, we don't exactly know if the harvest season really ends in Nisan and you can wait till year, but presumably if you wait longer, then there's a greater yield. That's clearly what the Gemara is trying to tell us. So if you're leasing it for a certain amount of money, and then you tell them, okay, your term is over, then you may be shortchanging him because there's still more. The yield is his as long as he has it. It's not as if he has to pay a greater rent if he's going to get a bigger yield. but you're shortchanging him on the yield, so he's going to wind up not making as much money. So Rava says that you're the one who's acting improperly. So again, so here, I mean, how to get around this? The question really becomes when the parties get into an agreement, what does the agreement say? Does the agreement, if the agreement is hard and fast and says, I'm giving it to you to listen, which is, let's say, 4 months. Okay, I'm charging you 4 measures of grain, and you have 4 months. If the yield is not finished after 4 months, I mean, that's not my problem. That we have an agreement. As long as you agree that Nisan should be the termination period, then that would be fine. But the custom there seemed to be that they did it until Nisan, and he extended it to Iyar and charged more money, and they were questioning him, L'chara, that's ribbis. He says, no, so he answered them, it's not ribbis because I gave him more time. Yeah, the custom may be to go till Nisan, but I gave him till Iyar, and typically that extra month will yield him a better yield. So if I charge him more, there's no ribbis involved because he's making more. It's a proportion of what he's making. So again, we see here a different situation where you negotiate a deal, and again, the people who were getting if you took 4 measures until listen, that's fine. That's the typical. That's what people seem to do, and there's no problem. The only problem seemed to be that Rava was out of line, and he says, "No, I'm not out of line because the yield was greater, and I knew the yield would be greater, so I charged them 6, and therefore I'm perfectly fine." So again, what seemed to have been a ribbis question isn't ribbis because of the greater return that he gets. So
Rabbi, the Sansino edition has an interesting historical note that casts some a little bit of light on this. Rava was very big even in the eyes of the government. So Rava's property got government protection. So he knew that if he left his crop in the field for an extra month, it would be protected and he would have a better product at the end. Because he had government protection.
Had government protection. There you go. So protection, it's important.
And sometimes the Persian government was very solicitous of the Jews. Of course, at other times it was terrible, but this was one of the times a Jewish leader was well regarded and well treated.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the details of what's going on inside Iran today, but there are Jews in Iran, and I'm not sure that we hear that they're being harassed or selected out. It seems to be that the Jewish community always had a certain place that the government always respected. Again, I don't know how it is under this regime, but you're right. Historically, the relationships was not a bad relationship between the Jews and the Persians. Again, we see from the time of Achashverosh, we got a picture of what things were like, but the Jews seem to have a little bit of a bubble inside the entire.
Well, when the Shah was their leader, they had great relationships.
They had great relations, yes,
including relationships with Israel.
Exactly.
But then once the Islam took over, everything changed. One of the first things they did is they took out one of the wealthiest Jews and they murdered him intentionally to show the Jewish people that you're under our control and we can do whatever we want to do.
Right.
This happened to be the uncle of one of the Persian kids that we raised, or a great uncle.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. This took him and killed him as a message for the Jewish people at the beginning of the revolution. This is 79 to 80 or something like that.
Yeah.
But
it's sad that is kind of the way regime has to. They have to show their strength by immediately doing something.
Yeah. Well, and they keep on their own agenda, and you have a couple of generations since 1979
Yeah.
in terms of, you know,
All right.
I don't know what the situation is today.
Yeah, we don't hear much, but
The Iranians that are out, they're generally very cautious to make phone calls to their relatives that might still be back there
right.
because all the phone lines were being monitored by the new
Right.
regime right away.
But prior to all these hostilities over the last, let's say, I don't know, 6 months, a year, or even longer, um, there are some Iranians in our community who have relatives, and from time to time, I would have a little bit of a discussion. How were things like sort of back home? And the impression that I always got was that, so to speak, you know, it's okay. It could be worse. In other words, yes, you're right. You keep a low profile and nobody bothers you. But I never got the impression that they were in imminent danger. That that the authorities were cracking down on them. Now again, maybe that's changed in the last year,
Oh,
especially with
yes, yes.
and there's always hostilities with Israel over
Yeah,
the
but
last.
even when they killed about 40,000 of their own protesters,
Yeah.
I mean, so it tells you how ruthless
Oh no,
these
no, there's no
people
question.
are. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So things they appear to be quiet, but we don't know,
We don't know the full extent of it. That's true.
you
That's true.
know,
So now, having raised this question with Rava, so now the Gemara is going to give us several examples of dealings with, so to speak, chashav Eden. In other words, it's is there a difference between just you and I transacting, or if you transact with an Adam chashav, with a Rava, so to speak? In other words, like you said, David, that Rava was different. He had protection. The government dealt with him differently. So the Gemara is going to give us several examples in that regard about dealing with people who have more chashivas within the community. Okay, and it's going to give us a different insight maybe into these examples. Okay, so Rav Mori bar Rochel mashkele hahu nachri besa. There was a goy who borrowed money from Rav Mori bar Rochel, and Mori bar Rochel. So Rashi tells us right at the top, Bas Shmuel habe v'nishbas v'nisa nachri. His mother married a goy, the Niskayer, and he was Niskayer when she was pregnant with him. So it's an interesting situation. So because when she was carrying the child, he was not converted, but he converted before the birth. So he's called Ramor bar Rochel as opposed to Shmuel, who again was his father. So a little bit of an interesting note that I don't know that that's something very prevalent, but if someone marries a non-Jew, and of course, if he remains a non-Jew, then he can't be called by his father's name. But if he's Megayer, then you take his name. So here, apparently, the Gemara is telling us that the Murray took his mother's name because of this situation. But in any event, he was an Adam Chashu, and he loaned money to a Nachri, right? He loaned money to a Nachri. Now, and what did he do? And so the Nachri had a house, and he gave the house as a mashkin, as a pledge for the loan. Hodazovna l'Rava. Now, and we're going to see again the standard at the time, in the time of the Gemara, was that when you took a pledge, then the pledge was good for a year, meaning that he gave him the house. So, and I think we had this in the Gemara previously, that the minimum time that he would be able to use the house, because once you have a pledge, you can use it. the minimum time would be a year. That's typically what a pledge was. So you give him a pledge for a year, and then Zovna Rava, in that year, the Nachri sold the house to Rava. So we have now a situation where Rav Mari is using or living in the house, and he has a loan outstanding, and Rava owns the house. Okay, so Nota Tresa Yarchishata. Rav Mari waited the 12 months, which was he was entitled to. He had for the 12 months. Shokal Agar Besa Amtele Rava. And he rented out the house. Okay, so he didn't live in the house. Apparently, he rented out the house, and he got the rent. But the rent was his because he had the mashkin, and the mashkin for 12 months allowed him to have to do what he wanted with the money, and he took the money. However, shakal agabesa amtel Rava. But after the first year, and he collected the rent, he gave the rent to Rava. Rava's the new owner, right? Rava owns the house. And so he felt that now he has to give the money. Again, he hasn't been repaid yet. He hasn't gotten the money for the loan, but he's making this money on the rent. And he says, no, the rent has to go to Rava. Amalei. So this is Rav Mori says, Hi Deloy Amte Lamar Aga Besa Ad Ha'idna. He says to Rava, the reason why I did not give you the rent money until now, right? I'm only giving to you now. Yistam Mashkanta Shata. Again, because the Gemara is saying that a mashkin is for a period of is for a period of 1 year, and that first year I'm in control, even though you own it because it was sold to you in the first year, but it's not yours because I have a minimum of a year. Now, of course, after the first year, I don't have rights anymore because it's now owned by somebody else. Okay, mine is only for a year; it doesn't get extended. Therefore, the first year is mine, and now it's yours. Okay, iboy nachri l'salke lo have a matzah misalkeli. What's my raya? My raya is that if the goy, the nachri, after selling it to you, wanted to evict me from the house, he would not be entitled to it. We have something obviously similar in our law, and if you've ever read a contract, there's something called quiet enjoyment. What's quiet enjoyment? Quiet enjoyment means if I lease you a property and it's for a year, you're entitled to the quiet enjoyment of that property for a year. If I sell the property to somebody else, you still have the rights for a year. That's and again, our law is probably taken from the historical halacha that a minimum a mashkin, and in our case it's a rental, but a mashkin is for a minimum of a year. So therefore, Murray said, I didn't give you any money because you weren't entitled to it. I'm entitled to the money for the first year. And the raya is because the Nachri would not have been able to remove me from the house. Hashta Lishkol Mar Agar Besa. But now, Rav Murray says, you're entitled to the money. I'm not entitled to the money anymore. So now I'm coming to you and I'm saying, take the money because you're the owner and you should get the rent. All right. So now this is a typical story. The Gemara wants to tell us the emphasis is because we're dealing with Rava, because we're dealing with Rava and Rav Mori, we're dealing with Toshav Eden, not just people who are normally in business. Omale, so Rava says to him, "You have a yadana to have a mamushkin le'lamar." Then he says, "If I would have known that this was a mashkin, lo havas avinale, I would never have bought it." Why? Because in essence, by buying it, he's stopping Rav Mori from staying longer than a year. Remember, it's a minimum of a year. Anything that happens in the first year automatically is Rav Mori. But if the property belongs to the Nachri and he hasn't repaid, then Rav Mori continues to be the mashkin holder of the property, and he can continue to rent it or do what he wants with it and make income. So here Rava is saying to him, no, slicha, my bad. If I had known that you had a mashkin, I never would have bought the property, because under the halacha, the right, because with the yid, the status of the property changes when he buys it. That mashkin is only good for a year. It's not if it belongs to the Nachri, but otherwise it's only for a year. So in the non-Jewish standards, there's no such thing as a mashkin and this, that, and the other. I pledge the property to you. You own the property, or you hold the property until I pay the loan. If I pay the loan in 2 years or 3 years, you have the mashkin. But once Rava bought the property, the mashkin ended. So he's saying, Lo havas avinale, I never would have bought it. So Rava took the high road here because he could have said, it's mine. He says, but I'm going to deal with you according to the according to Dinayhem, according to the laws of the non-Jews of the Nachri, right? And what is that law? Well, that as long as the loan is outstanding, then he can't evict him. Lo shakal ager besa, and he can't take away the rent from the house that he's renting. So in other words, you have the benefit of the house as long as the loan's outstanding. So he's taking. Rava says, I'm going to take the high road. I'm going to follow the laws of the goyim, not the laws of the Eden. No nami or shaklina minach ager besa. I will not take away the rental of the house until you get your money repaid from the loan. And of course, at this point, if I mean, he's going with Shiur Sadim, but Rava wants to have the house and the money, so he'll somehow orchestrate that the loan should be repaid, but which would be the proper thing to do anyway. But what he's saying is that Rava could have said, no, I bought the house, it's my house, and the halacha follows what among Eden. So the Gemara is giving this as an example to show that an Adam Choshev like Rava, when he could have taken the tack that it's my property and therefore the mashkin ends, no, he's saying, I am not going to do that. As long as you're not repaid on your loan, you have the mashkin and you have the rent to the house. Again, how is that something we would do? I mean, it's a question of there's nothing that compelled Rava to do that, by the way. I mean, Rava easily could have said, I bought the property. Now he's saying, if I had known, I wouldn't have bought the property. But now that I bought the property, I'm not going to ruffle feathers. I'm going to allow everything to take its place the way it was before. And you get the money as long as your loan is not repaid. So again, it shows from an Olam Gavra how one should act. That it's Neflim Shiur Sadim clearly, because there's no halacha that would have said you're not allowed to take over the property. Okay, so again, the one example. Mar's going to give another example.
But
sorry,
this example doesn't start to come into rivers.
That's right. That's right. Now
I'm waiting for rivers.
You're waiting for rivers
come out of the closet or something. And
right.
never shows up.
Right now we've pivoted since how the Gemara does. Well, we talked about Rava. Let's talk about and so there's no other logical place to put these cases. So the Gemara says, Agavorka, we're talking about dealings with an Adam Choshev. Here's how an Adam Gadol dealt with this particular problem. It's not a rivers problem, but clearly it's a.
But the prior ones were designed to show rivers.
To show rivers. Here, we're not focusing on rivers as much as we're showing on the dealings of
With
an
the person, yeah.
Adam Gadol and how he went beyond. Because again, if he was dealing with a non-Jew, fine, but he's dealing with Rav Mari, and Rav Mari can have the benefit of the rent. So he's saying, I'm going to go by the Nachri's laws, not about the Jewish laws. The Jewish laws say something different, but we're not going to apply them. All right. So now we're going to have several other vignettes.
How often does that happen where when a gadol like that says, I'm not going to follow the halacha?
Again, and this is there's other places shouts too. The Gemara wants to show us the hanhaga of a Torah Jew.
Okay.
This is the hanhaga of a Torah Jew. I could go one way and I would be totally legitimized because the halacha is in my favor, but I go another way because I don't want to take the panos away from another Jew. In other words, Rav Mari was the beneficiary here. So he said, look, Rav Mari, you were here first in this particular situation. I happened to buy the property because I wanted the property, but he's saying right up front, if I had known that you were transacting with the goy, I wouldn't have bought the property. I didn't want to usurp your benefit. I just thought it was a nice piece of property to have. So it shows something here that again, we can ask ourselves in any situation, what would we do? Oh, I bought the property. I'm entitled to the money, and no one would say boo because you own the property, and under halacha you can take it. But but the question is, can you go lefnim mishur sadin? Can you do something that is not just the halacha? It shows a kindness to obviously he didn't need the money. Because if he needed the money, then he would have said, I bought it because I wanted to rent it and make the money. So then there would be no question that he's entitled to it because he bought it as an economic thing. But if he bought it and clearly he wasn't pressed to need the money, so to speak, he said, Rav Mari, you take it. It's you're in first place. Then you should take it. We're going to see this in other cases, but there's a halacha of bar metzia. What is bar metzia? Bar metzia is that when your house, Jay, is near my house, and your house is for sale, and I'm going to buy your house, and Menashe lives several blocks away, and he wants to buy your house. So there's a halacha that I have kedima because I'm closer to your house than he is. There's such a halacha bar metzia, right? So again, it's not exactly that way, but that's typically what the halacha is. So the question is, okay, so we have if someone doesn't follow that halacha, okay, you're over. But at the same time, he could say, no, I really want that house because that house is perfect for my kids and they should live there, blah, blah, blah. But that's not the halacha. So you see that there are cases where an Adam Gadol would say, no, I have to be mevata, I have to step aside, even though I'm in first place, I should be the one to be able to buy it. But there are halachas, and sometimes we go to lefnim mishur sadin and we say, you know what, yes, the halacha might be closer to your view, but we go a little bit further and we say that we should allow for the other person to do it. So again, these situations appear in different places where the Gemara does bring down stories like this, where there was an option, so to speak, and they took the high road option as opposed to saying I'm entitled to it and therefore I can have it. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to give us another story regarding another chashuv. Amle Rava mebarnish Rav Ashi. Rava of the town of Barnish said to Rav Ashi, okay, so here, Jay, we're going to get back into the Ribbis Parsha. So he said to Rav Ashi, you know what? Look at this situation like we had before when we said by Rava when we thought he was taking Ribbis because he was waiting until Iyar. So he wants to give another example. Why that? Take a look. These Rabbanon are taking ribbis. Why? the Yoav Zuse Achamra Betishrei, because, and again, we had this Gemara earlier, they would buy wine in Tishrei for a lower price, Mafrele Beteves, and then they would sort of select the wine in Teves when that was the end of the harvest season. So again, it's the same kind of situation where I'm paying a certain amount today, but I'm getting more later, and that we said is ribbis. So right out, he says the Rabbanan are doing something improper because they're doing what is the typical case of ribbis by waiting for the wine to come in tables. Okay, so they asked that kasha on the Rabbanan. Apparently, that was a practice. So he said, "How do you get around it? How do you answer the practice?" Omale. So Rav Ashi said to him, "You're right. They paid in Tishrei. Achale lo ko yove, but they did it. They paid for wine and not for vinegar. What does that mean? Mi'ikara de chamra chamra. So the wine that ended up being the wine they bought in Teves was what they paid for in Tishrei. The challah. But what was, but the vinegar that appeared in Teves was already the vinegar in Tishrei. So what does this mean? Apparently, for those in the wine business, there is quite a bit of spoilage when you harvest the grapes and you put them into barrels and everything else. You don't know if you're going to get wine or vinegar at the end of the day. I mean, you do everything you can to preserve the integrity, but apparently, in the process, there was a number of whatever it is that causes the vinegar, whether it's a bacteria or some fermenting issue. So there's going to be vinegar and there's going to be wine, right? So, and you don't know. So he's parsing the situation by saying, no, when I paid for wine in Tishrei, I paid for the wine that I'm going to get in Teves because, again, we don't know the measures. We don't know the exacts. But what he's saying in principle is, I bought wine in Tishrei and I paid the fair price for Teves because there was going to be spoilage and there was going to be vinegar. And I'm not buying vinegar. I'm only buying wine.
Does it separate so you can separate the two?
But you don't know that when you're putting them in the barrels in Tishrei. You don't know when you open the barrels in Teves what's going to come out. So if I bought, let's say, 5 gallons of wine, whatever the measure, salt, whatever, 5 gallons of wine, and I paid in Tishrei for 5 gallons of wine, I knew I was going to get 5 gallons of wine in Teves. I didn't know if it would be from this barrel or that barrel or whatever. But let's say I wound up with 5 gallons of wine and 5 gallons of vinegar. In other words, there was a lot of spoilage ultimately in what I bought. So I wasn't getting more than I bargained for, according to what the Gemara is saying here, because in other words, no, I'm sorry. No, I went ahead. He shot who it was in Tishrei that they knew the wine they were going to get in Teves, and therefore that's what they paid for. So it's kind of a little theoretical. We don't know what wine is getting, what these grapes are going to yield. We know they're going to yield wine, and we know they're going to yield vinegar. We don't know what proportion. We don't know because
So we need to ask Menashe, who always looks up these things, to explain to us the process and
And,
how do you get vinegar when you know out of
yeah.
these barrels?
So actually, I did look up a little and didn't find a good answer yet. Apparently,
Oh.
the I was hoping to be based on density, but the density, it's like 1.01 versus 0.99. So you're not really going to get it that way. And
Right.
Well,
it
this
turns
was
out it's a
Rashi.
little
This
more, you
was,
need a more complicated process.
this
No,
was
but
Rashi. This was Rashi's business, so maybe he has something to say on it.
yeah, something to say. But you understand what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is saying is that it's not, I'm not buying it on the come. I'm not buying it and then I'm going to make a profit later. Whatever happens later was already negotiated before. I negotiated for the wine in Teves, in Tishrei, for what I'm going to get in Teves, knowing that in Teves there's going to be wine and vinegar, and I'm only going to get the wine. I don't know how much. See, we don't know the
So
quantity
how could he put any money down earlier? How can
because
he make any deals when you don't know what's going to happen ahead of time?
right. But remember that in Teves, the price of wine was always more expensive because it was at the end of the process. So the wine producers were charging more in Teves than they would in Tishrei. So he came in Tishrei and he bought. So the higher if he bought, then it's a problem of ribis because he bought and he didn't know how much he would get later. And by waiting until later, that's considered, in other words, that's the benefit, and that's what ribis is. That's what ribis is because you waited until later. Says the Gemara, no, it's not a case of waiting until later. He already negotiated his deal in Tishrei for
Tishrei.
Teves, so he wasn't waiting for what would come in Teves and therefore get a windfall because in Teves he would make more. Whatever it was that he was going to get, he already paid for. In other words, the cheshbon here is that since there was an Adam Chashuv, these were rabbis actually, Talmidei Chachamim, who were negotiating. They said to themselves, "How are we going to get over the ribis issue? We want to make a deal. How are we going to get over ribis?" So they came up with this idea that they were going to pay um, for whatever was going to be the produce. And it's theoretical. It's not actual. It's theoretical. For whatever was going to be the produce in Teves, we were buying it in Tishrei. We don't know what it is, but whatever it is, that's what it is.
So he may never get what he wanted to get.
Was that?
If he didn't get all the wine that he expected to
But,
get.
but that's all he would have expected. In other words, if, for instance, his yield was 4 gallons and not 5, then he paid for 4 gallons. And as they were miyashev, they agreed that no, I'm not buying 5 gallons, and if you give me 4, you owe me for 1 gallon. I'm buying for what will be the result. I know there's going to be vinegar, and I don't want. I'm not buying the vinegar. I'm just buying the wine. Whatever the wine is going to be, that's what I'm paying for. That can't be ribis because now you got
Yeah, he negotiated a wine price, and the extra has nothing to do with him.
That's right. So the Hori will say they weren't very smart in the way they were negotiating because they were maybe they were negotiating against themselves because they were going to negotiate for a certain amount and whatever they got, that's what they were going to get. But apparently they probably knew. Again, you asked about Chazaka. They probably knew more or less what that produce was going to be. Yeah, barring anything unusual, of course. And they said, that's fine. We're okay with it. We're okay with getting what will be the yield in Teves, and we'll pay for it in Tishrei. So it's not buying on the come; it's buying on a fixed amount, which we don't yet know. It's
Because
theoretical; we don't know it, but
the
it's
price. So they're basically saying that I know the price in Tishrei is going to be lower than if I wait.
That's right.
So therefore, I'm going to gamble.
Right.
I'll pay now, and I'll hope that it basically is at least what I wanted. But if there's extra, then that's not considered ribis,
Right.
because you agree to buy whatever comes out.
Whatever it was. Exactly right.
Well, otherwise it'd be a good ribis example.
It would be a ribbit. Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. So
Uh,
speaking of this situation, the Gemara goes on further. Ravina have a yoav zuzu livnei akra Shanvosa. Ravina gave money to the Accra bar Shanvosa. Shanvosa was a river. Accra was a town maybe near the river. This isn't Accra. This is Accra. It's a different town. And they gave them also money to buy wine when it was pressed. The Shapkalet Fei the Pisa. And the townspeople there, because it was Ravina was a lot of Chashuv, they would always give him more than let's say he paid a specific amount. He paid, let's say, for 5 gallons, and they would always give him 6 gallons. So they always give him more. So the hara, that looks like rivers. Also the Kamani Ravashi. So they came before Ravashi, and they say, and he said, Mishari, it looks like rivers, because he's getting 6 for the price of 5 because he waited until they gave it to him. So again, appearances are it's a ribis. On Malay, so they said, is this permitted? Is this okay? Mishari? He says, in. Yes. Why? So here we get into the question, which I know we've briefly discussed before. He says it's not ribis because they gave him a matana. Now the question becomes, when do you draw the line between what would appear to be ribis and a gift? Clearly, with a gift, you're giving him more than he bargained for, but a gift itself is not ribis. So how do you determine if something is ribis or something is a gift? So he said yes because they gave him a gift. Then it was okay. Now the underlying question is, if your expectation is that you're going to get 6 gallons instead of 5, then you could say, okay, by waiting until the end of the season, I got an extra gallon, and that extra gallon is ribis because it's more the typical case of, yes, I waited an extra month or whatever it is for the end of the harvest, and I got more than I bargained for. So that appears to be ribis, right? Our situation here is there was no agreement in advance. They said, we want to give you a matana. In other words, it happened, here's your 5 gallons. Oh, by the way, you're an Adam Chashiv, we want to give you an extra gallon. So the Gemara is trying to tell us that you have to make a distinction. Yes, they're here because it was an Adam Chashiv. I mean, I could have given a gift to anybody, not just an Adam Chashiv. But he's saying because you are Ravina, you're the Rosh Shiur, whatever it is, so we want to give you a matana, and there's nothing wrong with giving a matana. So the fine line here in this particular case is that there was not a prearranged agreement that you're going to get 6 and paying for 5, which would appear to be ribis, but you're getting your 5. Oh, by the way, we're giving you a matana of another gallon. So that gallon clearly shows to be a gift, a matana, and a matana can't be ribis. Again, what the Gemara is trying to tell us is it's the subtlety of how the deal was made. So gift giving, which might appear to be ribis because it's more than you bargained for, is completely okay. But how does one give a gift? Typically, one gives a gift. Again, he's saying this is what they used to do down the Gemara. They didn't say in advance, oh, we're giving you 5 and giving you a gift of 1. That's not typically what they did. They would arrange for 5. They paid for 5, and then on the spur of the moment, you said, okay, we would like to give you a gift of 1. So that's different than than saying in advance, I'm paying for 5, but because I'm going to wait until the end of the season, you're going to give me 6. That's not a gift. That's a negotiated. That's something that's negotiated and would appear to be ribis
But
because
if he says I'm going to give you a gift, oh by the way, at the beginning, the first negotiation,
yeah, if he says it in the
he
beginning,
says it, I'm going to also, because of whatever you did for me, something else a gift.
right,
I'm
that's
going to
okay.
add a gift at the end of this.
Yeah, but he speaks it out and he says it that way.
He
Yes,
says it, so it disables any ribis question.
it disables any ribis. Exactly right. Exactly right. So
Words matter.
right. So words matter, and that's exactly I think what the issue here is that all of these cases, each of these cases, uh, talks about a situation. Well, except the one where we talked not about ribis, but just straight about the case of another chashuv. But all these cases of ribis have a very subtle mark to them, and it's a question of understanding what is being discussed and being exact. And this is what the Gemara is trying to tell us, is that you have to be very, very careful in commerce, is that when you negotiate, you have to negotiate upfront as to what a deal will be and stick to the deal. Now, a gift can be given at any point in time in any situation, and it overrides the question of ribis. There's no question. But we're not talking about people who are ultra generous and are going to give gifts. So then it's really a question of in commerce, what's the deal? What is the deal? And what are you getting? And if you're getting something different than what the deal is, then you have to be concerned with ribis. And this is interesting because in our daily lives, we're not necessarily focused on the subtlety of ribis. We're just not. So could we potentially be walking into a ribis situation just because we're dealing with each other? The answer typically probably is yes. And we just, we all move on. In other words, we don't stelzach. We don't stop and say, oh, wait a minute, am I entering into a ribis situation or not? So again, no one intentionally wants to take ribis. But so again, if we realize there's a ribis situation, we should kind of be clear what we're doing. But it's not unlikely that in the daily life, people are over on ribis. Oh, just to close, I want to make one point. I heard a pshat that in this week's Parshas Maseh, the Torah talks about the sojourns of the Jewish people, and said there were 42 travels that Klal Yisrael made. So and 42 was the number. So the Chazal say that 42 is emblematic of the number of nisyonis that a person goes through every day. A person goes through, they don't even think about it. They don't know about it, but they go through, according to the Pshat, maybe more, but 42 nisyonis every single day. What does that mean? In other words, there are events that happen that we just sort of don't even consider to be events that have some effect on us, but they have an effect on us. Do we know? We don't even know. That's the point. So the pshat is that the 42 represents the 42 nisyonis, or the 42 travels of Klal Yisrael, which means for the future, the Eden are each going to have 42 nisyonis, 42 events, however you want to look at it, that will affect them. And of course, in the time of the Torah, they knew they were traveling because they had to pick them up and go. But that's what the Chazal say, is that number 42 has significance and has effect on us every day. Again, I only say it because in our world, we do so many things that we don't think about, which
it's the 3 weeks.
Every week, every day, we just do them.
I'm saying the 3 weeks,
and
lots of things happen.
A lot of things happen. We should be maybe more careful. But the truth of the matter is, if we stop and think, oh, what did I do today? I did this, this, and this. Wait a minute, was this really kosher? Did I do the right thing here? We don't do this, but as a matter of fact, we say that we try to be as careful as we can, but maybe an Adam Choshev and Adam Gadol who sits and learns in front of the Gemara 23 hours a day, he's not going to succumb to a possible violation. But we're only basar v'dam, we're only human, so we do the best we can. But this gives a beautiful example of how Yidden, especially Adam Choshev, would deal with other people, and maybe it's a mussar haskel for us sometimes. Let's be a little bit more generous and be one of the chashuvim who do something l'fnei mishur sadin that we're not expected to do, but we give someone we give the benefit to somebody else.
Yeah.
Anyway, so